So, welcome back. As announced, this session or this entire day in this room will deal with the global internet governance processes. And basically, this session is a really good follow-up from a session that we had also last year as a pre-event, which was about the GDC. But since these processes kind of all interrelate with each other, we don't know yet if to the positive or to the negative. We would like to organize this session in the attempt to, first of all, give an update on where we are, but secondly, also to answer questions, get into a discussion with you on the interrelationship of these processes. We have a fourth speaker is just coming, and the fifth should be supposed to be online. So we have Michael, not Michael, sorry, Mark Cavell, who will be, Michael, that's a good combination, isn't it? So we will have Mark Cavell, who will be speaking on the Global Digital Compact, give us an update as the chair of the European Stakeholder Consultation. We have Thomas Schneider, who will give us an update on Net Mundial processes. Anna Nevish is just to arrive. Anna, please come to the stage. Anna will be giving us an update on the WSIS process, but also on the WSIS we will have a separate session to deal with this one after this one. And then we have also one youth participant, Isan Khan. Isan was a EuroDIG participant. Anna, please come to the stage. Isan was a EuroDIG participant in the last year, and we found out that he was already very knowledgeable last year about these global processes, and since there's always the demand to hear what actually youth has to say on it, and there are not too many that have really depth dive into this already, we are very happy to have Isan here. And then online, we should have Esteve Sanz from the European Commission. Maybe he comes in later, and he will be speaking about the DFI if he arrives. If not, then we will deal with the DFI, with the Declaration on the Future of the Internet in the opening plenary. And without further ado, I would like to hand over to Anna. Anna promised to give us an overview on the interrelation of these processes, give a short update on the WSIS. And as said, Anna will be leading the session, which is purely dedicated to the WSIS afterwards. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you, Sandra, very much. And good morning, everyone. So we are in an interesting moment of internet governance, let's say like that. And this afternoon at 2 p.m., we will have the open consultation, the second regional open consultation on the WSIS plus 20. And I hope that many of you will be there, because I think that now we have more meat, let's say, to better understand where we are in the discussions of internet governance future. We are in the middle of the negotiations of the Global Digital Compact. We have to close this Global Digital Compact until September, when we will have the Summit of the Future. We have to link more and more the digital component with the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And so we are really 2024, 2025 will be really impressive years in the or at worldwide level on the in the field of what we will have for the future of internet governance. Or and if you are talking about infrastructure only, of course not. We are always when we have this idea of internet governance, of course we are talking about digital public policies processes as well. And not only public policies, but the policies, the technical policies, etc. So all these myriad of policies that concern nowadays internet governance and the multi-stakeholder approach, and what does that mean? So in 2003 and 2005, we had a very optimistic summit on the World Summit on the Information Society. And everybody, well, we were in a peace environment at worldwide level, more or less. So it was a totally different world that we have 20 years after. And so while we are discussing the future of the WSIS now plus 20, we have to deal with this global digital compact. Is it a process? Is it a one-off event? We will see, but it should fit in the discussions in the WSIS plus 20. So this is the context nowadays, and we have all the geopolitics influencing a lot all these discussions, and so we are. Well, it's a personal view, but I think that we are back to square one on what was achieved mainly in the Tunis agenda in 2005. So I think that this EuroDIG this time should be very strong on the ideas that will convey through the message of Vilnius and through the message of EuroDIG 2024. Because we have to discuss and to see what we want from what will be the position of Europe in all these matters, because it matters. And so the WSIS plus 20 was seen as the most important phase after the 10 years review was something that was already very hard to discuss, and so we stayed more or less like we were before with 10 years, but we adopted that in 10 years we will have a new review, more serious review, and at a high-level meeting, which high-level meeting, hopefully a ministerial meeting, because we have to count on the ministers to change the paradigm and to adopt what we want for the digital world, with all the things that we have nowadays, and that in a way they can be scary for the citizens. In other way, other citizens, they perceive this digital transformation with a good optimism, but we know that we are in a different era of the digital world. So Global Digital Compact, WSIS plus 20 review, here we are, and here we are launching the discussion for this EuroDIG. Thank you very much. And now I'll give the floor to Mark. Yes, Mark Carvel.
Yes, thank you, Anna, and good morning, everybody. It is indeed a busy time for global initiatives, which condition the way we work in multi-stakeholder internet governance and digital cooperation. It's a great time of change, great time of focus by the UN, in particular the Secretary General. So it's been important for the EuroDIG community to keep track of this and identify opportunities to participate in consultations, and indeed that is what we have been doing. There's a long history to the Global Digital Compact. I won't go into great detail about that, but it does go back to the high-level panel on digital cooperation, and then through to the Secretary General's report, our common agenda, where we first saw some kind of conceptual approach to digital cooperation, improving digital cooperation, as Antonio Guterres said, through constructing a compact which would set out a framework for objectives based on a set of principles, which would then be taken forward through commitments and actions by member states, but with a great emphasis on stakeholder participation. Our common agenda, the Secretary General's report in 2021, talked about a technology track involving all stakeholders, governments, the UN system, the private sector, including the tech companies, civil society, grassroots organizations, academia, individuals, including youth. So that was a very strong steer from the Secretary General that, okay, this was primarily an intergovernmental process, but one which would take forward the multi-stakeholder approach as set out in the WSIS process going back to 2005. So what is the aim? The aim of the compact is to agree shared principles for an open, free and secure digital future for all, and to set out a series of commitments and actions to implement a set of 12 principles. What are they? Well, the objectives which were first formulated in the zero draft of the compact, which came out at the beginning of April this year, those 5 objectives are the following. First of all, to close all digital divides and accelerate progress across the Sustainable Development Goals. So there's a strong linkage here to the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development. So that's the first objective. Second one, expand inclusion in and the benefits from the digital economy for all. So a strong emphasis on inclusivity. Third objective, to foster an inclusive, open, safe and secure digital space that respects, protects and promotes human rights. So a strong linkage across to the human rights aspects of everything in the digital sphere. Fourth objective, to advance responsible and equitable international data governance. Data and privacy and the coherent international approach to data flows, again captured in this objective for the compact. And the fifth objective, to strengthen international governance of emerging technologies, including artificial intelligence, for the benefit of humanity. Now, this objective has been tweaked a bit in the course of the negotiations in New York and following the consultations with stakeholders, to move away from an explicit ambition to govern artificial intelligence, which was the phrasing that was used in the initial draft, to strengthening international governance. So this is an example of how the consultations have actually led to some reconfiguration of that particular objective relating to AI and broadening it to include all emerging technologies with an emphasis on the benefit for humanity of these technologies. The principles, again, there's been some tweaking of the set of principles. Originally, there were going to be 10 principles. First of all, inclusive, as I've just discussed. Secondly, development-oriented, so rooting the compact in the 2030 Agenda. Third principle, human rights-based, anchored in international law. Fourthly, gender equality and empowerment, so closing the gender digital divide, an important principle for this compact. Fifth one, environmentally sustainable, so leveraging digital technology for sustainability. That's become quite a central objective captured in that principle. An additional principle that came out following the zero draft, which is now in the current Rev 1 draft, that's we've actually put on the EuroDIG commenting platform, that came out in last month, and that is equitable, tackling, and I'm quoting here, tackling concentrations of technological capacity and market power. So that's quite an important development in terms of the text. tackling market power. Continuing through the principles, the next one, I've lost track, seventh one, accessible. And this refers in particular to linguistic and cultural diversity in the digital space. Next one, interoperability of systems and governance. And I think this is kind of referencing tackling the risks of internet fragmentation. There's not much in the text about fragmentation and what that might happen, what might happen in the future. So that is important one to note. Advancing interoperability of systems and governance. Next one, and that is a new one, interoperable. That came in on the second draft. To add another two, the other one equitable and interoperable. These are new principles that have emerged following the consultations on the zero draft. The remaining four ones, responsibility, effective human oversight of technologies. Next one, innovation friendly, so that societies and businesses can recap the benefits of digitalization. Next one, multi-stakeholder cooperation will involve all stakeholders according to respective roles and responsibilities. So that is a principle that's very important and one we should cherish. And it's significant that the Secretary General is really championing a multi-stakeholder approach with that principle. And the final one, forward-looking. It recognizes that the whole technological environment we're working on is fast evolving. So the compact should be adaptive to emerging technologies. So, as I say, there have been some changes to the zero draft of the text that came out in April, as you see reflected in the Rev 1, the second draft, which we've put on the EuroDIG commenting platform. There are two additional principles. There is also stronger support for the Internet Governance Forum, and I quote, as the central forum for multi-stakeholder discussion on public policy issues relating to the Internet. And support for efforts to increase the diversity of participation in the IGF. So some reference there really to the agenda for strengthening and maximizing diversity in the IGF. There are also significant changes to the text concerning governance proposals for AI and the role of the UN. There is no longer, it seems, the ambition for the UN to establish the foundations for international governance of AI. That was in the zero draft. That's been replaced by UN supporting, I quote, ways that complement international, regional, national industry efforts and help capacity building to access, develop, use, and govern AI systems and emerging technologies. A potentially controversial commitment is still in the text about establishing a new UN body for emerging technologies. It's called the International Scientific Panel on AI and Emerging Technologies. So it's no longer limited to AI, which was the inference in the zero draft. It's now expanded to include emerging technologies. I think there's going to be a lot of discussion about this as a new UN entity. You'll see also in the revised draft that there are links to all the Sustainable Development Goals in the commitments to action that the text includes. A lot of attention has been paid to how the compact will be followed up, how it'll be implemented. And there's a lot of concern and anxiety among stakeholders that what was described in the zero draft is quite a complex array of UN bodies involved in the follow-up. These include the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, the HLPF, and the UN Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC, which will have the role, I quote, of monitoring and reviewing progress of the compact, particularly as it relates to closing digital divides and achieving, accelerating achievement of the SDGs. The UN Human Rights Council will also have a role in tracking progress to foster inclusive, open, safe and secure digital space for all. And how is this all going to be coordinated within the UN? Well, there is a proposal to establish an office within the UN Secretariat. That is starting to ring alarm bells of governance moving much more to the center of the UN. So there will be a lot of discussion about that in the final stages of the drafting. And how will the progress in implementing the compact be reviewed? There is a role seen for the WSIS Forum and also for the IGF, but it's not clear how this actually will roll out in terms of practical proposals. So we'll have to wait and see about how that will form. And I'm sure a lot of stakeholders see a much more important role for the IGF in following up the compact, in monitoring progress and reporting on it. The Secretary General does say that he would look to the IGF to hold an annual discussion about progress, but actually getting oversight of how progress is actually happening, because there are a lot of commitments in the text of the compact, commitments by member states, commitments expected of stakeholders. Who's going to monitor that adherence to those commitments and achieving any targets? It's not really clear. So I've talked quite a lot about, I think, what are some of the key issues. There's a lot more. It's quite a long document, the text. But we should all, I think, have an eye to how the next version of the text will appear. And that's coming out later this week. We're expecting it to come out on Thursday. This follows discussions earlier this month amongst the member states in New York, and there will be an opportunity to present this to stakeholders on Friday. If you go to the if you go to the Global Digital Compact page on the UN website, you'll get the link to register to participate in the open stakeholder presentation and discussions on Friday this week. So watch out for that. I have tried to take part in those discussions on behalf of EuroDIG when the co-facilitators for the GDC process, the ambassadors for Sweden and Zambia, have held these open consultations. And I've got recognition in the text from one of my interventions that the IGF is not just the IGF, the global IGF. There are also all the national and regional IGFs. So there is now recognition in the second text about regional and national IGFs. So and the role they play. They have a role to play in implementation. Let's see how those discussions go and contribute to those discussions. So we're almost there with the finalization of the compact and the text. There's going to be some more consultations, but of course it'll all be tied up ready for the Summit of the Future in September in New York. Will stakeholders have the opportunity to take part in those discussions at the summit? I'm not sure yet how that's going to be facilitated. Maybe there are people here who know. Maybe Thomas knows. So that'll be the next step. And then we have to follow on, of course, the implementation of the compact over the next year or so, following the summit. I'll stop there. I've talked a lot. I'm conscious of that, but who do I hand over to now? To you, Thomas, or Thomas? Okay. Oh, Anna, is it?
No,
oh,
no,
so.
no problem. Oh, yes, yes.
There's more of these. Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here in Vilnius after 14 years after the IGF tour 2010, which was a very nice experience, so very happy to be back. About the stakeholder participation, well, I don't think that there is a direct inclusion, but I mean, there may be some consultations and some things, but yeah. It's an intergovernmental process. And talking about intergovernmental processes versus multi-stakeholder processes, actually that makes a good link to the Net Mondial conference that was held, which I'm going to talk a few minutes about now, that was held in Sao Paulo in April this year, 10 years after the first so-called Net Mondial conference that was held at the same venue, at the same hotel in Sao Paulo 10 years ago. In 2014, we had a big discussion about the unilateral control of the US over the domain name system, over ICANN. These were the issues where most of the so-called, at that time, called internet governance discussions were focusing on. And then we had, of course, Snowden, and that raised the, let's say, dissatisfaction among many about, let's say, uneven impacts or uneven controls over many aspects of internet governance. And what then happened was this conference that the Brazilian government under Dilma Rousseff organized with the support of ICANN and its CEO at that time, Fadi Chehadi, and they developed some internet governance principles and a roadmap to implement these principles in a new way of process where governments were not, like we see in the GDC, were not negotiating on their own with more or less serious or regular consultation with others, but the actual negotiations on the outcome before and during the conference was happening with all the stakeholders on equal levels. And it was a little chaotic because there was no blueprint for this, but it worked. And most of the governments, most of the civil society and other institutions were actually happy with the result. And some, of course, there's always, it was like a rough consensus on the result. And now 10 years later, as we've heard, we're again at the crucial moment, but a different crucial moment of on internet governance. And also in a fairly short time, the Brazilians decided that it would make sense to have a Net Mondial +10. And instead of fighting within these processes, have a discussion about how these processes should look like. So what the conference did was adopting the so-called Sao Paulo multi-stakeholder guidelines about, actually they are not just about multi-stakeholder processes, but also about multilateral process. And they're actually quite a refreshing document, which was again elaborated and agreed on in a slightly chaotic again, but also in a quite an inclusive process, definitely more inclusive than other processes. And it does a few things. It resolves a big discussion today, the terminological confusion between internet governance and digital governance, which is something that some people are trying to tell us that internet governance is the thing that about domain names, critical internet resources, and digital governance is something completely different, and we like AI and data policy, and we need new institutions for this. But if you look at the WSIS documents, at the Tunis agenda, the mandate of the IGF, and at the working definition on internet governance from, was it 2003 or 2005? I think it was 2005. Then you actually see that already then. And if you look at the issues discussed at all the IGF, new technologies, new applications, new tools have been constantly coming into the discussion in the WSIS since 2003. We've been having AI discussed at IGFs and EuroDIGs for many years now. So there is no such thing as something completely different between internet governance and digital governance. And what Net Mondial does, it talks about internet governance and digital policy, which is an elegant way, and we hope that that may help to basically end this discussion that we need that there's a separation between these two. Of course, there are many issues, but that doesn't mean that they should take place, that the dialogue should take place in different worlds. And also something that the Net Mondial conference has shown is that those present, and there were more than 700 people, basically these guidelines that were supposed to help to improve a fair participation in all governance processes to make sure that all voices are heard, not just the ones, not just governments like in multilateral processes, but also not just the ones that have the resources, big companies or big other representation groups that have the resources to participate, but actually that also others should be able to participate through making sure that information is spread, that fair participation that is representative, at least to some extent, is supported, and so on and so forth. This is basically the essence of the guidelines, and they are not just applying themselves to multi-stakeholder processes like ICANN, for instance, or others, where we know that we have the problem of a proliferation of work streams that is difficult for, let's say, vulnerable groups or groups with limited resources to make their voices heard. It is actually, these guidelines are also applicable to intergovernmental, to multilateral processes equally, because also there are so-called multilateral processes where you have more or less inclusion and processes to hear voices from all stakeholders, depending on the institutions, depending on the issues. And you can actually use these guidelines also to see to what extent multilateral processes are inclusive beyond governments. And so, and of course, not everyone likes this, that multilateral and multi-stakeholder processes are seen as not opposing each other or mutually excluding each other, but actually as a coexisting and mutually, that have the potential to mutually fertilize each other. This, let's say, embracing approach to combine also multilateral and multi-stakeholder processes is something that most of the people think makes sense. Of course, there are some those that hate their governments or hate governments per se, like, for instance, a professor in the US, of course, they were deceived when the governments were not, as usual, like being presented as the bad ones, and the multi-stakeholder processes and the stakeholders as the good ones. But I think I would consider it as a good development that we see these processes as complementary, mutually inspiring each other, and that we have now, and this is the big achievement of the Sao Paulo guidelines, we have a blueprint that we can use to look at all the processes and say, are they inclusive? Do they allow stakeholders to make their voice heard? Are there processes to make sure that the voices are not only heard, but actually also reflected in the outcomes? So this is really something that is new, that at least a number of people have been waiting for. So we are very happy that this exists. Now we just need to make sure that this is also applied and used. So if any non-governmental organization like those that watch, I don't know, them do rankings on freedom of expression or human rights or other things, if anybody wants to use the multi-stakeholder principles, the guidelines of Net Mundial, and look into different processes and judge them accordingly to how they fulfill these guidelines and these principles, I think that would be an interesting tool to have. So yeah, it's something to think about. And in addition, and finally, also the Net Mundial recalls that the IGF is an important process, but that it still has a potential that it hasn't been allowed, or it hasn't been, let's say, developed to use its full potential when it comes to providing for more tangible outcomes. We do have, since the IGF in Geneva 7 years ago, we do have this outcome of messages that actually EuroDIG had from the beginning, and then the IGF took it over, the global IGF. But actually, in the mandate, there is still a provision that the IGF could develop policy recommendations, for instance, on emerging issues such as what used to be AI and data and maybe quantum or whatever new technologies in the future. And then the question is, of course, if this is supposed to be representative of the discussion and you have 200 sessions at an IGF, how do you develop a process that would give such recommendations a legitimacy? But fortunately, we have AI that we can actually use for these things, so it would not be fully impossible to monitor all the discussions held at an IGF, and then basically have of course, absolutely intransparent and manipulatable AI system to propose a policy outcome, which could then be reviewed as ideas. So there's room for development also there for the future phase in making the IGF stronger. And again, and I'll stop here, the Net Mondial provides for useful tools that we can actually use to improve our processes, be they multilateral, be they multi-stakeholder, and use our concentration. And this is also what it says. Let's try to make existing processes better instead of inventing new ones that may risk to not be better, but actually worse, because if they don't learn from the weaknesses of the existing processes, why should new ones be better just because they are new? Thank you very much.
Can I ask if Estefe is online to speak about the DFI? No? Then I would suggest we immediately give the floor to the youth perspective and then enter into a discussion with the audience. And for this discussion, I suggest, or Anna is... Okay, I thought that was covered in the first part. Then let's go to the WSIS first. Sorry for that. Okay, so Anna on the WSIS, but when you were not in the room yet, I was announcing that we have that WSIS session in as coming next. Okay. So we will be very brief on. But Anna, I don't want to take that chance to say a few words about WSIS because it will relate to the overall discussion, of course.
Yes, only to for you to take into account that it will be very nice to have you on the open consultation that will be held at 2 p.m. because we will have formally for the UN the second regional open consultation. So the first one was in Dubai in May. It was for Western Arabic countries, sorry. And the second one will be for Europe, and there will be a third one for Asia, and so on and so forth. So it will be very important to have you on the this afternoon at 2 p.m. Thank you.
Okay, and then hand over to Isan.
Hello. Hello. Okay, cool. Thank you. I'd like to thank you, Sandra, and Nadia as well for inviting me once again to speak at EuroDIG. In the EuroDIG wiki, it mentioned that I was supposed to talk about the EuroDIG perspectives on global internet governance processes. However, the youth are not necessarily a monolith in this space. There's a lot of diversity of opinions amongst all of us, and the messages that we came up with last year, particularly on global digital governance processes, were formed on the basis of rough consensus after a lot of discussion and debate, after which we came up with a certain set of principles that we could all unanimously agree on that we found were quite important. And the one thing that underpinned that, which was also mentioned in the consultation response last year by the Internet Society's Youth Standing Group and the Youth Coalition on Internet Governance, was a commitment to multi-stakeholderism. And if you will recall, last year there was a bit of concern after, for example, the policy brief was released from the UN Tech Envoy's office with the introduction of yet another organization, like I think it was called the Digital Cooperation Forum. There was a potential concern about marginalization of, in particular, youth voices because of an emphasis that might have been placed on multilateral processes over multi-stakeholder processes. There were a few positive strides, and we had discussed last year things, for example, like the Declaration for the Future of the Internet. But as we mentioned in the EuroDIG messages last year, these are relatively anodyne statements that need accountability mechanisms in order for them to actually truly be effective. In recent times, and these have all been covered by the speakers prior to me, we have seen some positive strides and things that reaffirm effectively the multi-stakeholder commitment to internet governance. And in particular, for example, if we look at the Sao Paulo multi-stakeholder guidelines, a self-awareness and an understanding that even if you have multi-stakeholder processes, there is sometimes an asymmetry in the distribution of power amongst those different stakeholders, and there are ways that you can try to make them more equitable and more equal, and it provides a yardstick that I agree with Thomas, we didn't necessarily have in such lucid terms before for how we should measure different internet governance processes. In particular, the Global Digital Compact Zero Draft, the first revision of that includes a lot of things that weren't there before that we find as the youth, I would imagine, to be particularly positive in this space. For example, in the objectives, and Mark mentioned this very, very explicitly and with force, there is a commitment to human rights that wasn't actually there in the first version, but that wasn't there in the original version, but that was there in the first revision, which we as the youth would consistently emphasize. If there's one strand that you can find in all of the previous EuroDIG messages or all of the different consultation responses that have come out of the Internet Society's Youth Standing Group or the Youth Coalition on Internet Governance, it has been a commitment to human rights principles, particularly in internet governance processes. So seeing that in the objectives was a good sign. I think Mark also mentioned the necessity to have interoperability involved in the actual text of the document, and as that being one of the ways to combat internet fragmentation. Internet fragmentation hasn't necessarily been mentioned at length, but one of the things that we have seen, which again is a positive development from the intersessional work of the IGF, particularly the Policy Network on Internet Fragmentation, is an explicit understanding of the harm of internet shutdowns, which have been mentioned in one of the commitments, namely that states would not shut down the internet, and any restrictions that would be placed on access to the internet would be done in accordance with principles of legitimacy of the aim that they intend to pursue, as well as proportionality of the actual restriction, which was something that was indeed covered at length in the Policy Network's discussions and at the EuroDIG session on fragmentation last year. So I think there's a lot of positive developments that could come out of this. One of the things that as the youth we definitely do want to see, especially as part of the WSIS outcomes in WSIS Plus 20, would be a renewal of the mandate of the IGF, and I think this is something that most, if not all, people within the internet governance community can agree on, even if we disagree on a lot of other things. And this is something that the youth in particular are focused on, mainly because it is one of the key vehicles for getting youth voices heard. There's an IGF track that is dedicated to the youth. There are also a number of sessions that are also largely organized by the youth, with youth participants as speakers and as panelists. And it's not something that is only for the youth to be involved in. There are numerous other stakeholders who take part in those discussions as well. So it is a time of caution, but it is also, in my view, a relatively optimistic time in light of the developments that we've seen, for example, coming out of Net Mondial Plus 10 and also coming out of the first revision of the GDC draft that we have seen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we can now enter into a discussion, and we would like to introduce now a timer so that every intervention that comes from the audience and also from the speaker on the panel should not be longer than 3 minutes. And we would, of course, also like to invite all online participants to raise their hand and take the floor. And since I know the rows are pretty tight, we will keep continuing with this catch box. So whoever would like to take the floor, I will throw that box to you, and then you have to move it around the room. So let me know.
Oh. Amazing catch. I hope it still works. Thank you very much. Olivier Crépin-Leblanc. I'm the chair of the UK chapter of the Internet Society. And it's really great to have all of the updates under one roof, as one would say. But my question is, there's been a lot of discussion on digital governance and internet governance. Are these two going in the same direction, or are they going in different directions, especially when it comes down to multi-stakeholder systems, etc.? Oh, God.
Who would like to take that? I think it's a pretty straightforward question, so possibly it's good to answer this. And
Sebastian wanted to add
So
something.
what we have nowadays is multi-stakeholder multi-stakeholder in multilateral process. So what we want to achieve with Net Mondial and why we were so, and when I'm talking on we, it's at least European governments, I think, that we were so supportive of Net Mondial plus 10 was exactly to understand what we are talking about when we are talking about multi-stakeholder in 2024. Because when it was the WISIS summit in 2003 and 2005. They were held in a very peaceful, more peaceful than today, world. And but it was very difficult to swallow the community, the technical community, and the civil society and the academia to have a role in internet governance. Nowadays, I think that it's very difficult for any government to say that the technical community, the academia, the civil society, and the private sector, of course, that they don't have a role. They have a major role. And I think at least that perception is something that we agree. The thing here is the power. Where is the power? And so we have different governments. Some governments think that they have the power to do everything, and other governments consider that they have to hear and to work with all the other stakeholders to have a proper decision-making process. So I think that we are in a very interesting era for the discussion of the multi-stakeholder, because personally I think that even the war should be the decision on the war should be, and the development of the war should be taken on the basis of a multi-stakeholder process, and not to leave that for governments alone. So because we see that all the civil society and academia, they are very against all these movements of war, and there is something that will be interesting to see in the upcoming years, is to see whether if more women is in the leadership of the world, if there will be so many wars as we have in this century. So it's really something very bad. At least multi-stakeholder is totally important for these global issues. And climate, internet, digital, we have to have this multi-stakeholder approach, definitely. And we have multilateral processes, we have to have them as well. And the key thing here is how to work and develop, negotiate, and perform in the multilateral arena in a multi-stakeholder way. And Net Mondial plus 10 helped a lot on that. I don't know if you want.
I would think we should.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much, Sébastien Bachelet, Chair of EuroDIG. Thank you for having us here. And following the question of Olivier, it's not just about the question of do we go from internet governance to digital governance, but also I get the impression, even with the intervention this morning, that we are going to have the multi-stakeholder to help the multilateral decision. And therefore, I'm very thankful with what's happened in São Paulo. But I hope that differently to 10 years ago, we will not forget about Net Mondial during 10 years and just come back in 10 years. Therefore, we need to find a way, and not just asking the Brazilian government to do something, but we need to find a way to keep the momentum on what's happened in Net Mondial plus 10. And I must admit that when I came to Net Mondial plus 10 in São Paulo, I came with different opinion on what was the final document. But I am very happy with the final document. Therefore, I think it's important, this discussion between the multi-stakeholder discussion. The last point is that, not 2 points more. One, it's regarding war. We don't need multi-stakeholder. We need to stop war everywhere. We don't need to start any war. Therefore, we don't need any process to start a war. We just need a process to stop all the war in this world. And my last point is just marketing purposes. We as EuroDIG made a conference, telephonic conference about the anniversary of Net Mundial 10 years after the recording is available. And we have made a small summary of that, as well as a summary of Net Mundial +10 in Sao Paulo. That's on the EuroDIG website. You have 2 newsletters about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sebastian. You can slowly throw the catchbox to Adam, but before we give the floor to Adam, we see the red lights, and the red lights are our sign that there is an intervention from the chat.
Yeah, at this point, the conversation is also quite interesting in the virtual room, but there is a question indeed from Bufuno. And it is, and I will read, I'm not sure I understood the distinction between the IGF and WSIS processes. It seems that they are both tackling the same thing. I'd like some clarification, please, for the speaker before Mrs. Anna. I'm sorry, I did not get his name correctly. I think it's for Olivier. And then there are another topics I could summarize, but I think it's better if we give the floor back.
Okay, so I would say Adam, or is there an immediate reply to that? Okay, then just an immediate reply.
I tried to not use 3 minutes. Just a brief reply on WSIS and IGF. I mean, historically, these things were 2 different things. The WSIS forum was initially called the WSIS Action Line Implementation Meeting, whatever, facilitation meeting, supposed to look at the progress of the implementation of the action lines of the 2003 Geneva Action Plan. And the IGF was set up as an open and inclusive multi-stakeholder forum, by the way, by a Swiss diplomat that had a key role in setting it up. That way others may have done it differently. And then, of course, the ITU and UNESCO learned that the format of the IGF is very dynamic, and they basically were inspired by the forum of the IGF and adapted the WSIS forum in the same way. But the WSIS forum is now also very much inclusive, very much multi-stakeholder driven, but there's still more impact of the governments because it is run by UN special agencies. So there's overlap in the discussions, but there's a different history, and the purpose initially was different, and the setting is still slightly different. Thank you.
Thank you. Adam, and after Adam, please pass it carefully to Jörn, but don't hit the camera.
I'll try to break something. Thank you. Adam Peake, I work for ICANN, but this is just a couple of general questions, really. One very simple one. We talk a lot about challenges of all these processes, challenges to the GDC, changing things and threats. What are the opportunities that you see? We should be thinking about opportunities for us in the room to engage in these. And of course, ICANN is concerned about threats to the multi-stakeholder model, but there's much more than this. We're talking about opportunities of the digital world. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that. And the second is really about process. So we know we have the Global Digital Compact feeding into a process in September this year, the Summit of the Future, which will produce a Pact of the Future or something. And then sometime towards the end of next year, we will have the WSIS +20 review. And that will be an outcome document. What will that outcome, what do you envisage that outcome document to be? And from the end of September, when we have the Pact, what do you see the process to be? There'll be an appointment of co-facilitators. What's their starting document to reach that end document in October or whenever it is, 2025? So we're going to have a negotiated document at the end of next year. What's going to happen for that year process from New York at the end of September? Where are our entry points as multi-stakeholders? Will there be a starting document, a chair's zero statement, or what are we going to be looking at? Thank you.
Well, I think that one will be for me, perhaps. So the open consultation that I was talking before, that will be held at 2 p.m., it's part of this review. So let me be more formal about this process, because we need these formalities, otherwise it will be a bit chaotic, and we need to understand what is the different steps. What will come up from the GDC, I have no idea, but it will influence definitely the review of the WSIS Plus 20. But for the time being, it has been requested by the UN Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC, to collect inputs. So it was been requested by ECOSOC to the CSTD. So CSTD is the Commission on Science and Technology for Development of the United Nations. It's a functional body that responds to ECOSOC. And since 2006, after the second phase of the WSIS, it was asked to the CSTD to do a follow-up of the implementation of WSIS, both the two processes, 2003 action lines of Geneva and 2005 with the IGF. And so since 2006, the CSTD didn't change its name. It's about science and technology, but it's about the WSIS as well, the WSIS follow-up, and to see how the implementation has been so far. So it was being asked by ECOSOC to collect inputs from all WSIS implementation of WSIS outcomes for discussion at its 28th annual session to be held from 7 to 11, 2025 in Geneva. So in CSTD from 7 to 11 April, there will be a report of the review. And this report is being elaborated, is being produced through the open consultation that started with a questionnaire that ended on the 31st of March this year. And it is continuing with open consultations. We had a first open consultation at worldwide level in Kyoto during the IGF in October. And we had another one in Geneva during the e-digital days of UNCTAD. And now we have these regional. So the first one I mentioned in Dubai, the second one during EuroDIG, and the others will be others, I mean, in Africa, in Asia, Pacific, and the GROLAX region, and America. So there will be different regions, and with these different open consultations. And they are all informing this document that will be produced for the CSTD and will be discussed in Geneva from the 7th to 11th of April. The results of the CSTD will be submitted through ECOSOC to the UN General Assembly for its overall review of the implementation of the WSIS outcomes in 2025. So there is this formal and official roadmap, and it will end formally in April next year with the presentation of this WSIS plus 20 review. And then we will have the formal discussions in ECOSOC and UN General Assembly. So for the time being, we have to be very, very active and dynamic. Thank you.
I see the red light is on, so in the interest of remote participants, let's give the floor to Joao. And then I see a hand raised from Jim, Mark, but before is Jörn. Any Luis?
Yep. We have hands raised from Wolfgang, Benedict. I asked for cam on, but I'm asking to unmute and have the floor for users.
Thank you very much for the very interesting presentations. My question would be the criticism of the IGF leadership panel of a possible agency dealing with artificial intelligence, and also your assessment of the future role of the IGF leadership panel in a future strengthened IGF. Thank you.
anyone who takes that question?
Again, I try to be short. We were, the Swiss government was among those that pushed for a leadership panel because we were trying to do something against the criticism that the IGF has not enough political impact. And we thought it would be helpful if there was like a higher level body that would not have would have the role of an ambassador of bringing the voices from the IGF to other decision-making bodies, let's put it that way. And I think it more or less works. But what the role of the IGF leadership, I mean, it's not really defined somewhere in a law. It is something that the IGF and the stakeholders agreed that they would give it a chance. I think we'll have to see what the role of the IGF will be in general in the process that Anna outlined, and then also what the leadership panel's role will be, how we can still further strengthen, let's say, the political weight of the IGF. And again, in our view, having some higher level people than us here, for instance, may help that some other people that may not listen to us may listen to others, but they should not have an agenda of their own, but should actually portray the voices heard at the IGF to decision makers. So that's still our idea. And if that would derail, if that did derail, then I think we should correct it. So far, I think it has, again, more or less worked. And yeah, that's my answer for the time being. Thank you.
And now the floor is yours, Jörn.
Hello. Yeah. Thank you for your interventions. I've got one question regarding the shift to multilateralism. I got the impression that it's also a shift to politics. So while we used to have internet governance as guardrails, trying to, of course, prevent bad things, but to leave as much freedom as possible in the middle, we now have a tendency, at least to my, that's my impression, maybe you have a different view on it, which would interest me, that governments are trying to implement politics, be it good policies like the UN saying they want to implement SDG 2030s or equity or Chinese politics or whatever, but that we are no longer talking about the necessary guardrails of technology, that we want to just prevent the bad, but that we want to enforce the good using technology. And of course, this means that we will have a loss of freedom. And I see this as critical because what is good is often disputed and might not be, there might not be an agreement on what should be what the purpose of regulation should be.
Thanks, Jan. I would ask you now to throw it to Jim, but be careful with the cameras. And I was just reminded that I should remind everyone to state your name and affiliation for the record, and also that others recognize you.
So,
Too late.
So thanks, Sandra. Jim Prendergast with the Galway Strategy Group. And Anna, thanks for the high-level overview of the process. I think that's helpful. If I could ask you to maybe expand upon it a little bit for the benefit of those who aren't as familiar, what are the avenues for people to engage with their member states and delegations leading up to the CSTD meeting? And then once that document does go to New York, is it set in stone or is it still open to negotiation? And again, what can we as the community do to help inform our member states in New York as part of that process?
So the community is being heard. So we are trying our best for everybody to, for every stakeholder to talk and to say and to write what they envisage for the future of the WSIS review. But of course, everybody is a bit, I don't know if concern is the best word, but people are not understanding very well these different events, well, let's say like that, because I don't want to call the GDC a process. But it will be, so all the community is already working for the GDC. The WSIS plus 20 had more time, and we had all so we had the questionnaire, we are having all these open consultations to hear the community, because the governments, they can use other channels to influence the process. Even if, well, I can tell you that we don't have so much government so keen in all these processes. It's like only at the end of the process they are very keen, and we have governments discussing things that they are not aware of. So all this process, it's very important more and more that the different stakeholders engage with their governments, to send papers, to inform them, because they are not aware. So we have this horizontal problem at different regions of the world. So we have a community very interested and very engaged, but then when we have to have a decision, a final decision, the problem is that governments that are discussing and negotiating, maybe they are not so engaged and they are not so aware of what is being discussed. And so in the CSTD, at least, we will try to have governments involved in that discussion, that they are aware of what the discussion is. But of course, there will be then a discussion in ECOSOC level, and then will be a new discussion at the General Assembly's level. So it will be a whole process throughout 2025. So what I'm asking to everyone is to inform their governments, to send documents, to send notes, to send their position papers, because it's very important, because it is another way to engage governments in all this process. I don't know if I respond to your question, but...
Okay. No, I think that's helpful. I think there's a wealth of knowledge outside of governments about these issues, and just more opportunities for us to engage with member states is important, particularly with member states who are involved in the CSTD process. And then obviously as it moves to New York. So what I'm hearing from you about when the CSTD resolution does go to New York, it could still change. It's not set in stone.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
we have to remain engaged through December of 2025.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Totally.
Great. Thank you.
Because some governments cannot, well, maybe they will be not so aligned with this report, but the report is from the open consultations and from the questionnaire. So it will be very, I think, very fair for the community.
Just one sentence about expectation management. Not all the governments are the same, and not all the UN processes are the same. Before you spend energy in writing documents and papers, check whether your government or whether a particular UN process will actually look at it. And if it doesn't, before you write the paper, make a fuss about the process and use the Net Mondial principles, because some processes are still just ignoring. They pretend they ask you to write papers and papers, and then we'll just put them aside. So that also exists. So find out how this works, and if you think you can't trust it, then protest before writing the substantive papers. Thank you.
And we have a whole cycle of regional IGFs in 2025 to get those messages across as well.
Jim, I would ask you to pass it slowly to Lucevis, but in the meanwhile, Mark was asking for the floor, and I see a gentleman in the back, and as well Nigel. And I know we have also another, oh, sorry.
Over here.
Okay. Jana was it, right? Got it. Okay.
So I go first, yeah. Thank you, Sandra. Mark Arvell, Internet Governance Consultant, EuroDIG member. First of all, just to pick up Adam Peake's reference to the Pact for the Future. This is the principal outcome document from the summit for the future in September. There is a text of the pact. It has been negotiated, is continuing to be negotiated. There have been opportunities for stakeholders to hear the progress of that and to non-government stakeholders, I mean, to hear about the progress of that and offer comments. It's in 5 parts, and there's one of the parts is science, technology and innovation and digital cooperation. And the focus of that part is on the opportunities of technologies and also managing the risks and also development aspects and so on. And then that provides the link to the Global Digital Compact. It's actually referenced in the Pact as providing all the actions and commitments in support of what's summarised in the Pact. And while I've got the mic, I just want to say, as I said, we've got the revised draft of the Compact on the EuroDIG commenting platform. I've put on the platform some guiding questions to help you sort of focus on some of the issues that crop up as a result of the text. And as I say, there is another text, another version of the text about to come out. So if you have comments about the Compact, what's not there or what's not right or what's undesirable in the body of the Compact and also crucially in the follow-up process, have a look at the commenting platform and get your comments on there. And then, we do aim to submit to the co-facilitators a pan-European input reflecting the comments received and what people have said in the EuroDIG consultation so far, including our webinar back in April on the zero draft. Okay, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Louise, you're next.
Is this on? Yeah. Louise van der Laan, ambassador for the Dutch Internet Governance Forum and member of ISOC Netherlands. I wanted to ask if the panel would reflect maybe on the recent political developments, both globally but especially now here in Europe, regarding what kind of impact that could have on the values that we generally hold dear when it comes to freedom, but also some kind of regulation that we do accept is needed. And when you're saying go back to your governments and talk to them, we're going to have a crazy right-wing government in the Netherlands. Would you then, maybe I'm looking also at Thomas because of your experience as a civil servant, does one try to deal with it at the level of the administration, or because politicians sometimes come and go, sometimes they're not as involved, definitely are freaked out by the technicalities of how the internet works. What would be your very practical advice in how we could do that with those governments that we do think are going to make and have an impact? Thanks.
It goes to the very far.
Should I give a short reply now, or do you want to take another question?
Can someone who wants it raise their hand? And then I'll start passing it. Okay.
The gentleman just behind the pillar was with the glasses.
Here, I'll give it to you first.
Yeah, but.
Shall I go ahead or Sandra? Shall I go ahead or?
Yes, please.
Okay, thanks. So Janne Hirvonen from the Finnish Ministry for Foreign Affairs. I'm attending EuroDIG for the second time. First one was in Tampere, so good to be here. Many thanks for the insightful presentations and insights. Maybe a few remarks or comments at this point. First of all, I do sense some sort of frustration among those colleagues who are dealing with the GDC negotiations, especially the ones who have been dealing with these topics for a longer time. I'm quite new to the topic, but in a way, in the panel we might have insights on this topic. And how do you see that? Should we maybe aim a bit lower to the low-hanging fruits instead of a more holistic approach in these negotiations? I think this is something that many of the colleagues who have been dealing with this topic for a long time are wondering at the moment. Another point, there has been good discussion here about the commitment and how we engage the stakeholders and the general public in these discussions and these negotiations. I very much feel that there's a lot more that we can do in order to engage the local people, the general public, in these negotiations and processes. Many, to my understanding, feel that these are some processes far, far away from their daily lives. And I think it's important that we ensure the buy-in and the commitment from the local people and populations in these processes. And maybe a question that how could we ensure the buy-in from the global majority, especially the G77, to these processes? Thank you.
Thomas, you want to take?
I'd like to quickly respond to both. First, to what Lucevis has asked. This depends on your local culture and on the situation of the state of your country, but we know that we're all walking on thinner and thinner ice in terms of stability for processes. So there's some civil servants that actually remain while on top people come and go, but of course on top the people take the decisions. So it depends on the case. But again, I mean, and the other thing is, and something I'm witnessing after 20 years in this, it's not necessarily that ministers know better what the internet and AI, whatever is, that the ministers 20 years ago. But there's some people around them that know better. And if you find out who to talk to, that may help. Let's put it that way. And again, be vocal if you're not heard on all channels that you have. That's the only thing you need to fight for. Or we all need to fight for our rights to party. Otherwise, yeah, we'll hear about that tomorrow evening. But that's something else. And then to my colleague from Finland, and also what Jörn Erbgut said. Of course, 20 years ago we were talking about technical stuff that was not so impactful to people's lives. It was about, we had the dream and the vision that lasted until the Arab Spring, that the internet would be good and we could trust each other. We don't need no laws and everything. Now we're at a different stage. Whether that is nice or not, or good or not, is something else. But of course, there's much more money, there's much more power, not necessarily in the internet infrastructure, but on what is happening over the internet. And of course, then you can also do more damage. You can do more good things. And that the people then put pressure on politicians to regulate because they want to somehow have their rights protected. They have fears, legitimate or not legitimate, so that there's more pressure. And I wouldn't say, it would be interesting to maybe discuss what do you mean by lower expectations. The question is, what are the right expectations? And I think Adam made a good point. We are against the elements in the GDC that where we think, or my government, for instance, think that it invents new processes where I have existing ones, and the way the new processes are set up will not be better. So that's for us the waste of taxpayers' money and waste of all our time, basically. But there are other things that are, where there's a need to mention things, there's a need to highlight challenges, to highlight opportunities, and show a way, show a vision where we want to go, which is something different from duplicating processes. Thank you.
The mic is with the gentleman in the back, and then I ask the mic to go further down to Nigel. Are there any other hands raised that I forgot?
The rogues gathering.
Martin?
Okay.
And Mark.
Can you hear me? Okay. I like the Beastie Boys reference, Thomas. Always a good start. David Fairchild, I'm First Secretary at our mission in Geneva, so I'm very excited to be here today. I think just to start, and similar to comment made at Net Mundial, there are member states here to listen to stakeholders, so I don't want to take the mic for very long. I think when we talk about finding friends in the room and friends to talk to, I do encourage member states to take the time to ask the question of what are the issues, because I'm going to thread a couple of comments together, but really it is all New York right now, and coming from Geneva, it makes me sad to say that, but the reality is that the GDC negotiations are very much being led out of New York, and so for stakeholders in the room, as you think about your advocacy as we get to the terminal stage of the GDC and the pact, I really do call on you to focus your attentions in that direction. Geneva has a place to feed information in, but sadly, I think most of the decisions are being taken there at this point. I had the privilege of listening to the Secretary General speak to the ITU Council last week, and if you haven't had a chance to read his speech, it is online. A couple of things that struck me, and then I will simply then bridge to quickly some ongoing negotiations to highlight. The Secretary General basically said that the GDC is to update and upgrade digital cooperation, which, take it or leave it, suggests that he believes that there is a governance gap. And I think the community needs to understand what that means, and I think Jim's right that we need to look for the opportunities in that. Things are changing. I use the word ossification. I think 20 plus years, things have to change. Things are changing, and I think the most important stakeholder that has probably changed in the most recent past is member states. They are a stakeholder. Unfortunately, they also run the game. So there are a significant number of member states who feel something needs to change. What it was interesting from the SG's speech is he never used the word IGF and he never used the word multi-stakeholderism, which I thought was also quite interesting, and only one reference to human rights. So I think we can appreciate that what is going on inside the negotiations is very much about what is the future of internet governance, whether it's multilateral or multi-stakeholder. And I know I'm not there, but I know from colleagues who are in the room, this is the debate, human rights and how to frame multilateralism versus multi-stakeholderism. And what we're seeing is a massive divide between those who are supporting the multi-stakeholder models and those who want to shift it to a UN-centric, state-centered model. So I'm going to stop there because I realize I'm now out of time, but I really would appreciate just hearing from the group, you know, how do you see advocacy working? Because I think from our sense, you need to find partners, whether they be member states or individuals, who are prepared to carry your message.
Now it has to go back in the front, so to Nigel. And I also understood we have a remote intervention now from Estefe. So I would like to ask Estefe to stay here for a few minutes so that we continue the round of participants' intervention, because I understood you would like to say something about the DFI. So first Nigel, Martin, Mark, and then Estefe.
Hello, Nigel Hickson, UK Government. Good to see you, Estefe. Yeah, just very briefly, a couple of points. And I suppose I was going to start this by saying, get real. This is not going to be a walk in the park, either the GDC or the WSIS Plus 20 process. I mean, many are better students than geopolitics than I am, but I've just learnt a little over 40 years. And I would say the geopolitics are more probably challenging in terms of the internet governance space than they have been for a long time. So I think what people have been saying is absolutely right. I mean, first of all on the Global Digital Compact, Rev 2. Well, let's see what Rev 2 brings, but we have seen the G77 and China paper, and that was a significant pushback from what we had seen before in terms of a multi-stakeholder approach. So if anything is reflected in that paper in the next revision, then it's going to be less positive. And this really matters. And it really matters because what comes out of the Global Digital Compact will influence the WSIS Plus 20 process and will influence it significantly. And so I don't think any of us should be, if you like, well, I'm not saying we shouldn't be optimistic. I think we should always do our best and put a positive spin on what we can. We should point out the real benefits that have occurred under the WSIS process. But indeed, we are going to face significant issues when it comes to the UN General Assembly discussions next year. Which I suppose finally brings me to, what can we do? Well, what we can do is we can hold governments to account. We have to be more bold. The UK has to be more bold. The European Union has to be more bold. We must hold governments to account. We cannot have a situation where countries engage in multi-stakeholder processes, where they get benefits, where they get kudos, where they get applause from multi-stakeholder processes, and then put their hand up in the G77 and say, we want sovereign rights, Mr. Chairman. We don't want the recognition of multi-stakeholder bodies that are coordinating the internet. We must not have that situation. We have to be real. We have to work with governments. We have to cooperate with governments. We have to ensure that the WSIS Plus 20 process perhaps better reflects the needs of developing countries, as was discussed at the WSIS Forum, as no doubt will be discussed at the UN CSTD and the report that comes out of that. But we have a lot of work to do. And finally, I'm out of time, I do apologise, but stakeholders, yes, follow Mark's advice, take part on Friday in this process and stand up and be counted yet again.
To Martin, please.
I would have been okay with a throw in this distance, Nigel. Thank you for your introductions and yeah, of course, I care, Martin Botteman, I care, I follow this. And I see the need for multilateral underpinning for everything we do in the internet, because the internet has become so important to the world. At the same time, we also recognize that it may be useful to keep some of the internet governance out of the hand of political interference and make sure that there's a global good, which is an internet that serves all, potentially, no matter what your particular government thinks of it, recognizing there's different governance in the world and in different relationship with their people and with each other. So what can we do to make sure that this basic facility, this basic connection to information and communication can be there to serve the world and help us to get closer to achieving the SDGs and matters like that, while at the same time respecting the fact that, yes, abuse has been made, particularly on the content and the data level, that will need to have some underpinning in regulations and international treaties. Simple question.
Maybe Mark, because you raised your hand as well, could take that question, or Esteve is going to be the last intervention today, but before we knew that he's online, we had that queue of operation already, so Mark was the last one in this queue, that's why I would like to give him the floor now and then to Esteve.
Lucky you.
Well, it's a tricky question if I sort of duck it that way, but let's take that away. I mean, I just want to echo, first of all, what Nigel has said. We may well see some pushback on the text of the GDC, and we have this last window to react to that. So use the commenting platform we've set up for that purpose. The process of consulting widely on the GDC has not been ideal. It's been pretty challenging. There hasn't really been opportunities for active engagement with the co-facilitators in a discussional way. It's been a matter usually of having the opportunity to make a short statement, and then it's sort of relayed in those terms. But it's interesting that the pact for the future does look at transforming global governance. It's the final part of the pact for the future, and that does provide the opportunity to contribute to ensuring that all relevant stakeholders do participate meaningfully in UN processes. So I think that is a sort of window, a ray of light, if you like, on the future for UN process and opening up multilateral decision-taking to effective and meaningful stakeholder participation by non-government stakeholders. And likewise, there's a part on youth. I mean, it really is a valuable statement in the pact about in the part regarding youth participation, ensuring that youth voices are heard at the national and international level. I think that's also another ray of light. Okay, I'll stop there. Thank you. Sorry, Martin, I didn't really respond to your question.
I'd just like to add one comment. It's about the speech of the Secretary General of United Nations, António Guterres. So read his speech that he made during the Kyoto meeting, and read the one that was addressed to ITU. They are totally different, because he knew exactly to whom he was trying to convey his message when he talked to ITU. So he had to measure what kind of words he could use.
Okay, let's finish the discussion here on these several topics and give the floor now to Estefe Sanz from the European Commission.
Hi, hello everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me to this event. I'm really sorry I could only join later, but I had the opportunity to hear many of the comments that the community, the stakeholders have been providing in relation to the GDC, the concerns about WSIS. So I just wanted to start this with reassuring you that the EU shares many of these concerns. The negotiation of the GDC, for example, is very well coordinated by the EU delegation in New York, and I can tell you that we take all these concerns, which are shared, are almost no-brainers, very much into account when we go into the negotiation table and discuss with member states about how to handle them. And I would, if you allow me, I would. Despite, of course, the many contributions that we see from G77 and not like-minded parties that are a bit farther away with what we have in mind, we maintain relative optimism about the GDC negotiations and the GDC text. We think that we are on the right track, but the next session of the negotiations is going to be crucial, and let's see if we can find acceptable commitments while respecting the red lines that the EU have as well on the text. So just wanted to start with this, and then very briefly, we are engaged basically into two global processes that relate directly to internet governance. One is this declaration for the future of the internet, but the other one is this notion of the governance of Web 4.0, which I would also like to use this opportunity to announce a forthcoming conference in 2025. But on the DFI, the Declaration for the Future of the Internet, you know that this is a document that was launched in April 2022, that it has now more than 70 countries who have signed on basically to promote an open, free, global, interoperable, human rights-based internet. There are a series of commitments that these countries do. This is a very sharp document. There is nothing like that in international politics, and the GDC will certainly not be like that. This is a document that, of course, we have in mind when we negotiate the GDC, especially the human rights sections, etc. But as a landing point, it will really provide value in the sense that there is a very sharp and clear commitment of countries towards not doing and doing certain things in relation to the internet. In December 2023, we launched a project that we call a Global Initiative for the Future of the Internet. This is a relatively well-funded project that aims at continue promoting the open internet globally, but also having very much the DFI principles in mind. So it's somehow connected to the DFI, and it aims at really improving the implementation of the DFI principles, but also engaging stakeholders. We have organized a lot of events with this project already, even though it was launched just a few months ago. You might have come across some of them. For example, events in the WSIS Plus 20 forum, in the ICANN meeting in Kigali very recently, in Accra in April in Ghana. We presented a series of reports related to the project, but also conference of small island developing states. We have things planned in Latin America, things planned in Florence. So there are plenty of projects and activities and workshops that relate to this project. I think that in relation to these workshops, it's important to understand that we normally organize these workshops in relation to one particular set of DFI commitments. And what this means is that what we are gathering is input on the context and the way that the DFI commitments should be implemented by stakeholders. And then the leaders of the project, the consultants who are managing it, which is basically the European University Institute, will use all this input to provide a series of documents and reports, etc., that make these DFI commitments deeper. Just very quickly, just let me announce you two things that we're very excited about that relate to this project. We are discussing the architecture of what we call a DFI tracker, a declaration for the future of the internet tracker, which we hope will be an interesting accountability mechanism for DFI signatories. That will again involve different inputs from different stakeholders, but it will be systematic. So we wanna trace the commitments of the DFI, how states are complying with the DFI, and this is something that is work in progress. We hope we will be able to present this exercise in RightsCon conference in Taiwan next year in 2025. And then the second thing that relates to the GIFI project is that we are now also excited to think about what we are thinking in terms of what we call DFI spin-offs. So commitments that stakeholders, so private companies, but also potentially technical community, etc., can sign up to that mirror or map DFI commitments, but at the same time, they are specific to these different stakeholder groups. So these DFI spin-offs, these DFI commitments, or related commitments to support the open internet by different stakeholders, this is something that we will launch as a global conversation very soon as part of the GIFI project. And then the third thing that I wanted to tell you very briefly is this conference that we will organize. It will be a global multi-stakeholder conference that will take place last day of March and first day of April on the governance of Web 4.0. This, the Commission and the Council, at that time it will be the Polish presidency, will be in the driving seat of the organization of the conference, but it will be a multi-stakeholder conference engaging different actors and different stakeholders. And what we aim in that conference is really to have a conversation about the way that internet governance institutions need to adapt to the internet of the future. So are governance institutions ready for that? And that's something that we will be discussing in early 2025. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Esteve. And is the mic on? Yes. And with this, we are slightly over time. Our technicians need to prepare for the next session, and I declare the session to adjourned. Thank you very much. Next session is about the WSIS process.